Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. You know, when you live by an ocean, you never go thirsty. And today we are going to talk about them. The proverbial them. For those of you who have been inside of a truth movement conversation, you will have been ridiculed by the ill-informed, by the non-researched who pretend to be experts and authorities on content, and they will invariably say to you, "Who's them? Who are you talking about?" Trying to worm out of the conversation, out of the circumstantial evidence, out of the proof that there's a centralized force that we can sense that rules our world. What's really interesting is that there's this illusion that if you were to follow all of the official stories, that somehow you have a complete grasp of reality. And if you so much as look behind you, when you go behind the camera and look at who's making this film, who's making this reality, well, it's new territory, it's uncharted, because we're always told to look the other way. Through the lens of mass media, through the lens of the books that you learn from school, through the lens of man-made religions that shape the light that makes your reality. What's also really funny is that you will invariably run into folks that don't have any education. And you'll find, if you're like me, you will find that they're more open-minded because they're sort of used to not knowing things, but dealing with life. And if they don't know things and they take a really heavy position that they do know things, and they're usually not doing too well in life. But a lot of the mutts like myself, you're self-educated, or you have varying people that you've bumped into your life that really helped you out. You were just very curious. And you accept the fact you don't know things, but unlike a lot of folks, as soon as we find out something we don't know, we become ferocious. And the internet's only become an incredible tool to ensure that we get as much reference as possible from as many areas as possible. But now the art is trying to find the disinformation people. It's funny, every time I mention David Icke, I get like one or two comments going, "Wow, you even mentioned that guy. He's a reptilian guy, right?" I'm like, yeah. But he's also an amazing aggregator of information that he didn't write, but that just simply impressed upon him ideas. And he's a good connection guy, so he connects things together. Some things I don't agree with, but then again, it's not because I'm educated about the subject. It's just I'd have to do a lot more research to agree with him. But one of the things that he identified to me beautifully, and this is something that everyone feels, even those who don't believe a single thing, is that there are coordinated efforts all over the globe, or flat disk. Agendas are hatched globally. The idea that we have hundreds of countries on this world that we're on, and the majority of them somehow work together, with or without a UN agenda, with or without a treaty between two countries, it's remarkable. And the more that one understands what a particular region of the world would choose had they been left alone to make their own decisions and not influenced by bankers, it starts to become very apparent that there are forces that are acting outside their interests. Al Gore made a movie at the end of 2006 called Inconvenient Truth. Now, even though the thing was based on absolute, complete horseshit, and never ever reveals the known percentage of CO2 in the greenhouse gas layer, which is 0.054%. For those of you who are really horrible at math, if I took your television in your living room and I colored 1 pixel for every percentage that represents in the overall picture tube, which is the greenhouse gas layer, we'd be overcompensating by fully lighting a single pixel. There's virtually no CO2 in the greenhouse gas layers. But why mention that? The reason I'm going to mention that is that it revealed them. It absolutely revealed them. And how is that possible? Well, he got a Grammy. He got an Oscar. He got every single award you could possibly get for that piece of shit film, based on a theory that was deprecated and ridiculed about 6 months later. It showed that they can do anything they want. What are the odds that DiCaprio sticks his nose up the ass of this global agenda for global warming, climate change, and then he suddenly gets the Oscar he's been waiting for his entire life? You should have at least got one for Who's Eating Gilbert Grape, but he got robbed. In exchange for his uninformed opinion about things, he gets a career. And there's a bunch of those people. But this is about them. Who are they? Now, you hear me mention this quite a bit in the episodes, but I don't really stress the them and the they. So I'm not a News at 11 kind of guy. I apologize for digressing up to this point. But we're really talking about the capstone to the pyramid. You hear me talk about the banking elite. And that is who is in the capstone of the pyramid. That's who's there. Who are they, though? Well, now there's a bunch of theories that they could be dome owners, liaisons to the dome. But let's leave all the flat earth stuff out of this particular episode and just go with straight up flawed, greedy human beings. Let's do that. Now, I built up a scenario in my politics episode. I'm very proud of my politics episode. If you like this show, I would encourage you to listen. It is rather long, but is rather important. Because what I do in that episode is I build up a society from a group of people that crashed on an island. And I show you the absolute evolution of how politics and politicians and countries and families and regions get corrupt through sheer organic evolution of the perceivable have and have-nots. Them is very similar. Let's just say you have a group of people in a computer simulation. You're looking down on them. And they're not a crappy simulation like the ones we actually play. These are actual, full-blown, fully designed, sentient, Homo sapien human beings with all the genetic capabilities that we have. Don't worry about how we got there. And they start to coexist. They start to mingle. They start to figure out how to survive. Maybe you've pre-programmed in them the zodiac, so they know the seasons. They know when to harvest. They know when to hunker down for winter. Hell, maybe you just start them off at the equator, so they don't really have major seasons, at least life-threatening seasons, right? It's a lush area. There's plenty of food, all that good stuff, right? But then it gets kind of populated, and they need to branch out. They just absolutely have to branch out. Whether it be circling the Earth at the equator or going north or south, they're going to start running into different temperate zones, where the temperature is going to get colder. The world's going to get a little more hostile. The very animals that are predators are different, and therefore every technique to catch them, to stop them, to kill them doesn't work anymore because they're different. And at that point, someone's going to have to create shelter. Someone's going to have to create weapons. And someone's just going to have the need before another group of people. But because we're Homo sapiens, which means tool makers, we have this genetic trait to engineer solutions to problems. I mean, how did we become the dominant species on this planet when we couldn't possibly survive in the wilderness by ourselves easily at this point? I mean, and I'm not really talking about the entitled kids. I'm just talking about the fact that we don't have rugged bodies. We don't have bodies that naturally can stand winter, whereas a bear does. We don't have a coat of fur on us, right? We're not like gorillas that can pull your arms off. We're not that strong. But yet, through our tool making, through our thinking process, and maybe some other privileged gifts from above, we managed to become the dominant species. Maybe we always have been, depending on the stories that are true. But now imagine between the two of us, one of us is a tool builder and one of us isn't. Let's say it's you. Let's say you are the tool builder. Let's say in the first round, for instance, I managed to come up with shelters. I figured out that if I tie some tree branches together, or we figure out how to etch rock, or we could just look at this natural formations of rock, that we can find caves and we can hide in them once we get the animals out of it, right? And for a while there, I'm the dude, and I have somehow figured out how to find these safe places or build these safe places. And so you definitely want me in your tribe. But it goes to the next level. We have to advance into other areas where maybe there's hostile other humans. Maybe there's hostile creatures, and you happen to develop weaponry. A spear with a sharp rock on the end. An arrow. Whatever. A club with some spiky shit on the end. Now, the shelter was pretty good. But that's just something to live in. Doesn't give any dominance over you. In fact, you could probably learn how I do it. But a weapon, it's a little more complicated. How did you tie the leather on the end of that thing, and how did you get it to stick, and, what is a nail? Geez, I don't even know. But you figure out all this stuff, and it becomes a device by which you could take a life. Now, the most I could do with my shelter thing is not build you a shelter, and that takes your life. But shelters take a little while. They can only host so many people. You need resources. So what are you doing with your spear? You could build a ton of those damn things and hand them out to people that are loyal to you, and you could take a life. And all of a sudden, there's a power element that is introduced into society that has not existed prior. An instantaneous, I choose whether or not you live or die. Pretty interesting, right? Think about the transformation in man. Now, I would imagine that man has always known how to take a life, so this is a bit of a silly analogy. But I'm willing to bet some are better at throwing rocks, slinging stuff, hitting people with sticks. Just watch a few piñata videos on YouTube. You'll find out that hitting something with a stick is not as easy for others, for some of us. But now let's advance up this theory, because all of you know where I'm going. We're in the middle of society. The haves and the have-nots on really a fundamental level is nothing more than a perception of one group of people to another group of people. But now, out of all the forces that one could possibly have access to and apply to their fellow man, what's the one that's most important? Is it sheltering? Nah. Is it killing? Maybe. Maybe we're getting warmer. But I'm willing to bet that the most intellectual, metaphysical power, but I'm willing to bet that one of the most important metaphysical things that one can do to another person is have control over them. The power to control them by any means necessary. Meaning you can use your shelter, if you can, in a particular way to extort something out of another human being. Subservience, loyalty, serfdom. And then the world changes, depending on the quality of your soul. Imagine someone as a chieftain, a king or a queen of a good nature. They really want their people to do well. They distribute the wealth evenly, but everyone has to work. What is the king's are the citizens. What is the king's is the citizens as well. One of those situations. Everything's fine. They're willing to work really hard to build walls and to build palaces. Seems pretty cool, right? But in the end, someone always gets there first, right? Whatever innovation that involves mankind, they get there first. There just always is someone who gets there first. Regardless of what concert you might throw, unless you create multiple entrances. Let's just say you create one door to the next Motley Crue reunion promise tour. One person's going through that door first. And that's just the way the world works. So the first thing we need to understand about them is that the group of people we're talking about simply got there first, and they learned how to, and the classification of what we call first, the destination of which they are the first to enter, is ultimate control over mankind through a particular series of means. Now, there should be a lot more requirements on you than one thing to control you. There should. For a guy, should be a hell of a lot more than sleeping with a woman. It should be a lot more than access to money. It should be a series of things that build up a universe that you'd like to be in, as opposed to one force. But in this day and age, they use money. That's what they use. They have so beautifully honed man's desires and man's needs through an economy, a single force, that all they have to do is control the money, and you will do anything that they say. All they have to do is control money, and they've got us by the short hairs, because it's linked to everything. How do you eat? How do you get shelter? How do you do anything in this world without money? Now, there are a handful of things that people understand. So if you cherish love, you can get that for free. Sex you can get for free. Up to a point, right? Up to a point you can harbor the elements that make those things possible, right? But let's get very specific, because those are just the basics that build up to this. But I need you to understand that, because it's very, very simple. In this day and age, we have essentially two types of folks that are at the real parameridian stone at the top of a pyramid. And I would say that in the order of authority and power, it would be the banking cartel families. Those who learned how to start and instill and enforce a fiat system. I know that 99% of you understand, but if there's one straggler coming in the door and going, what the hell are you talking about? This is money that's not backed by anything. It's just paper certificates that we all agree on that have a value. But there's no limit to its quantity, and so therefore we cannot control its value. Right? If I told you that a cherry had a certain value, but then I plant a bunch of cherry trees and everybody has cherries, then that value is going to be ridiculously deflated, right? Or inflated, I should say. So as far as we know, the history that we have been given through the internet and through each other, with a lot of documentaries made before the internet really got its HTTP shot in the arm, the Rothschild family is the most well-known family that we mention on this show, and it's happened all over the internet. And for those of you who don't know the history of that family, you have a father who lived in Frankfurt, whose name wasn't Rothschild. Rothschild means red shield. Rothschild. And he was a precious coin dealer, as the story goes. And he started loaning money to the government of Germany. And he started realizing, it was like you had a coin that was worth $10, and you give a piece of paper that says, here's a piece of paper worth $10. And what they soon realized, and this is thousands of years before this particular thing happened, the money changers have always known this. If you have a big pile of gold and a bunch of paper certificates that are claiming ownership of this gold, that nobody really wants to come get their gold ever. So everyone loves the paper solution because it's light and it's easy. And it's not as alluring. If you had gold coins in your pocket and you're walking around downtown, you're going to get mugged a lot faster than if you have a bunch of paper in your pocket, because the person stealing the paper knows that they can't today go and exchange it for gold, which is what legal tender was all about back in the day. So he got into this fractional reserve banking thing. The king kept giving him gold and treasure, and he kept giving them paper back, which is kind of funny because he was dealing in the precious coins, and it was all a matter of honor system. Well, I'm going to give you this piece of paper from another situation, and then you're going to say I own that coin. It was interesting. But the Rothschilds actually negotiated to get their little store, which had a red shield hanging out front, onto the premise of the royalty in Germany, thus validating them to the rest of the world. Once that little move happened, everyone was like, boy, I want to get involved with this. He had 5 sons. He sent the 5 sons all over Europe. Every single one of the sons had the backing of the father, so they had tremendous perceivable cash value, and they probably did have the gold at the time. So they continued this process of loaning it out to government officials, loaning it to the royalty of the regional areas, until one day, at the conclusion of the Battle of Waterloo, one of the sons who lived in England pretended at the London Stock Exchange that England had lost the war to Napoleon, and the bonds that backed the currency of England were being dumped like crazy because people thought, oh my God, this is all going to get taken over by the French. Secretly in the back, the young Rothschild's son had a bunch of individuals scooping up all of the bonds, thus taking over in one fell swoop. In one morning, this guy seized complete control over the British government. And that was sort of the coup de grace of taking over all of Europe. And that just kept going and going and going. Once they had complete control, then the royalty had to come to the Rothschilds to decide what to do. And because they had set up their empire in separate countries, they could actually influence the royalty and thus the armies of individual countries to war against any of the other countries that descended. Now, what they should have done, the countries, is they should have caballed together and wiped these motherfuckers out and said, look, that's not going to be allowed. But why were they successful? Why were the Rothschilds successful? I'll tell you why. Because a bunch of dipshits took paychecks to be quieted. The Rothschilds just walk in and go, are you going to be one of the generals that's going to come after us? If they say this, oh yeah, I am. All right, how much money? How about you take $1 million? It's like 1810. How about $1 million? Is that good? All right, cool. There you go. Hey, we're having a barbecue on Saturday. Why don't you come over? Oh, you're a duke now. You're an earl. You're a von. How you like that? Now you got status and money. Now that was the stranglehold on the world right there. Now by the 1850s, the Rothschilds had bragged that they had amassed, I think, $6.5 billion in wealth. They were new money, to be honest. They weren't anything but lower upper class. Now they would be the tip of upper class. But that little boast in the 1850s where they wanted to kind of brag about their wealth helps us understand their wealth today. Now, for those of you who are fairly decent at math, why don't you amateurize up $6.5 billion annually at, say, 4%, meaning you just multiply it times 4 and then take that total, put it back in the algorithm, and keep going until 2016. If you have an old calculator, it will show an error. If you have a new calculator, you're going to start to see the exponential indicator to say this is how much money you're talking about here. If you have a new calculator, you're going to see a number in the quadrillions. A number that exceeds any theoretical amount of money that has ever been created in world history. And that's just saying that they took their entire wealth, pushed it into investment situations at 4%. Now, that might be a little ridiculous, but you need to understand that when Abraham Lincoln was trying to borrow money to fight the Civil War, as Bill Still, I believe, described, it was in excess of 3,000% loan. And that's what drove Lincoln to create the greenback, which was a sovereign piece of currency backed by the gold reserves of the United States of America. But that's just one family. That's just one family. And they're lower upper class at the time this was all going down. And all that means, for those of you who don't know what that means, new money is lower upper class. Doesn't matter how much money you have, you're not considered upper class until you've had hundreds, if not thousands of years in your family line of having money. Because with money comes etiquette and comes behavior. Now the notion and the assumption is that the Rothschilds were somehow the richest family in the world, all by themselves, and that they were the first. Meanwhile, England is conquering the frickin' planet. The British Navy took over every single coastal region of the world that was worth anything. This is happening simultaneously, if not already having occurred. The King and Queen of Spain did the same thing. Their navy was amazing. They had shipped some folks over to North America to start their conquest, right? America's nearly celebrated its 200th anniversary, not of independence, but of existing over here, as the Anglo-Saxon white man was taking it away from everybody else before the Rothschilds made a move in the 1770s. Was it in the 1640s? Columbus started doing his thing. He was long dead before Father Rothschild started doing his thing. What about the Habsburgs? What about the Saxe-Gothberg family? What about the king and queen of Spain and all of their people? Now, one of the important things you need to understand about the foundation of their power system through money is the recognition of gold as the de facto standard of valuing money. Because I think a lot of folks overlook the fact that gold was not always the backing mechanism behind money. There was something called the talent stick way back in the day. It was phenomenal. According to Bill Still, in his Money Changers video that he created in the 1990s, of which, fortunately, he was screwed out of the royalties of. He's got one, something about Oz. I forgot the title of it. Used to be a big fan of his, but he's pretty mainstream. He got really stuck in the Malaysian flight that disappeared. He was getting disinfo like crazy and just repeating it, all of which has become ridiculous at this point. But his Money Changers video is as good as it gets for looking at past history of money. Completely independently made. Absolutely anything but a shill. He's very chill, but he's not a shill. But the talent stick was a jagged piece of beautiful wood. And it was a rod of wood that was wide. And someone would cut a zigzag out of the whole thing. Brilliantly done. I mean, I don't know how they did this, honestly. Maybe the wire or something, or a really thin blade. But they would cut these two halves, look like alligator teeth by the when they were done, but one half matched the other half. And if any of you know security and know prime number, public-private keys, what they did physically in wood is what we're doing with prime numbers and math. It was beautiful. One side only fits the other side. But then you could give away a talent stick to someone and say, this other stick is in the bank on top of an asset of some sort. Could be gold, could be a piece of jewelry, but it's got a value. I mean, the system itself has valued this thing at a particular value. And you could buy a house with the talent stick. Just hand off a little piece of wood. And if someone needed the money, needed the actual physical asset, they could take it in the bank and pull out the other stick because they had a number on it. And it was only going to be one side fits the other side. Boom. And I guess that was the longest standing method of currency in Europe, I believe in Britain, in world history. Over 750 years, talent sticks were used. Now, most of them were teeny tiny because you want to carry them in your pocket. So if you had a talent stick that was like anywhere from 6 to 10 inches long, you're talking about that's a talent stick a country uses to exchange big, giant trade agreement, balances, right? But you got all these areas in the world that didn't value gold as a currency. They value gold because they dug it out and it was a shiny metal. I mean, come on, look at the entire world's chaotic soil, water, organic life, and then you pull out this piece of steel, this little nugget of rock. And, gold is very malleable to heat, especially the higher the carat. For those of you who want to get all baller and you go like, man, I want myself an 18-karat gold ring or a 14-karat gold ring, you'll find the ring actually bends on your hand with the body heat of your body. If you bump it, it will bend. So you want to get 10-karat gold just to make sure the damn thing's hard enough that it doesn't fall apart. I designed one of my buddy's wedding rings once, and he went off and got it made with really high-end gold, high-end white gold, and he can't wear it because it bends. So my point of mentioning that is that you have a lot of areas of the world that developed at different paces, and they did not get into gold as a mechanism for trading wealth. But we did. And what's ironic about it is that we don't use gold anymore. We don't. They do. So gold was a stepping stone into power. That became a mechanism. But gold was a pain in the ass, right? Gold was a pain in the ass because they kept having to dig more out of the ground if they wanted more wealth. Lest they, inflate the value of the currency, devaluing it, right? The quantitative easing that we've seen in the last 10 years in America here. So they needed something else. They needed a system by which there were no limitations. But the perception among the people was that the system was sound. And they moved us from a regular currency into a fiat system, saying that if they had 1 bar of gold, they issued paper certificates against that bar of gold, because nobody comes back to get their gold and carry it around, they're allowed to create 100 units of paper for every 1 unit of gold. Meaning 99% of the units are based on the principle that you won't come get that gold. So they dump a bunch of currency out there for the world to play with. Allows us to expand. But then they got a problem. If that system, which is now referred to as the fractional reserve system, gives them power, they've got to control the country itself. And the famous Rothschild phrase is, "I care not who makes their laws if I control the printing of their money." And they figured that out because of Granddaddy Rothschild in Germany was able to take over Germany by simply giving this Ponzi scheme, this shilly little Ponzi scheme, to the royalty of Germany, and watched how utterly docile they became to him because they had to pay their troops to fight wars. Now that's an underpinning, and we have to mention the financial underpinnings of them to essentially understand why we're always saying they're the banking cartel families in the world. The ultimate control mechanism that we have allowed to manifest, because we're not in a Gene Roddenberry Star Trek world where there is no money. It's money. That's what controls us. I would assume, and I've heard a whole list of family names that are as powerful and are in the same business as the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds simply were the most vocal. And there is a slight chance, I mean, we know where Rothschilds are in this world, Jacob Rothschild and what have you, talking about the Malaysian flight. But I guarantee you, whoever they are, the mechanism by which they maintain control over us, it is a fiat currency system. So now let's wake up and let's be them for 1 split second. Because this is important. And we always miss out on how utterly simple the definition of them really is, because it could have been you. It still could be you. I mean, it really can't, but I'll tell you, Mark Cuban was born not a billionaire. Mark Cuban was in the right place at the right time and was able to come away with billions of dollars selling a little internet company. Elon Musk was not born a billionaire, but he is one now because he was a partner in a company that sold. He made billions of dollars. Now, Musk is a pretty interesting guy because he's been able to do a bunch of other stuff. Cuban, not so much. But Cuban, I think, is a good guy. He tried to finance the final cut of Loose Change, and they put the insider trading scandal on him. Charlie Sheen was going to sign up to narrate it. He all of a sudden had all his problems. Now, Charlie Sheen is a self-destructive force if there ever was one, but I think his intent prior to frying his mind with a bunch of drugs is probably fairly decent. But now let's just say you wake up them. You're a child of them. Or you're an adult of them. You're a full partner in the controlling structure of the world. The Bilderberg Group is a tiny organization from your perspective because you're up to the very tippy top of the pyramid. Now, when you and I wake up, we wake up in this sense of chaos. Oh, shit, what happened today, right? That's sort of the feeling you have if you want to read the news. What are you going to do today? Well, whatever you're able to do with the amount of money you have. But now let's say you wake up them. And you wake up with a phrase in your head that has been there for multiple years, perhaps since birth. And you say to yourself, I own this shit. I own this whole fucking place. I own the world. I own it. Because my family was smart. My family has better genes than everyone else's family. My great-great-granddad, great-great-great-great-great, whatever, figured it out. Figured out the money exchange system. And was able to fight and war and hide and pop out of nowhere. And at the right time, win every single time. If I want to meet a world leader, I'll just make a phone call. And I won't go to them. They'll come to me. If I want any woman in the world. It probably goes all the different directions in their world, but that they want the romantic company of someone, they just point. Bring her to me. Bring him to me. Whatever. Oh, they don't want to, sir. They don't even get that. They don't get that phrase. Yes, sir, is all they ever hear. And whether or not that person wants it or not, they give it up. Now, they may be extremely civilized at the top. Who knows? There's some of us that believe that at least the groups right below are not. It's really funny. There's this great comedian on Netflix, which is our rental software here and our online streaming software here in America. I know that doesn't exist in Europe in some regions, so her name's Ali Wong. I'm going to mention one of her bits for a very specific reason because I think we're right here. She has this phenomenal stand-up routine. She's 7.5 months pregnant in this particular episode, and she works it into her bit beautifully, but she talks about being addicted to porn. And one of the things that she admits, which no comedian I know has ever admitted, was that if you're into that kind of thing, you get a sexual, you take all your normal low-hanging fruit stuff that's considered the respectable things to do in sex, and that's your level 1. And then eventually you get tired of that and you go to a little higher and a little higher and a little higher till you're totally and utterly perverted. And that's just normal man watching the internet. So for those of you who are wanting me to make the point of how evil these people are at the top, I do believe that if a mortal man can get completely perverted looking at the internet and just constantly trying to come up with a pornographic video to outdo the previous one, hell, maybe you stay in a particular zone for a year, but then the next year you got to go up one level. It's corrupting our entire society. For those that can't maintain control over their minds, that's why our pedophile levels have gone through the roof, right? I mean, just imagine the fabric of, let's just say there's only Catholic priests are your pedophiles in the world. And now you can take mortal man because they have gone through too much viewing or whatever, and they get into the boy touching phase or whatever, child touching phase. This reprehensible behavior becomes their standard, and all of a sudden they have sympathy. The thing that you and I can't understand at all, they now have sympathy for those that do this. They try to find cliques where they're going to be safe to do it. So you take... And rock stars are very known for this, where they go from being heterosexual to homosexual because they simply have had so much of the opposite sex that's like, what's new? Oh, well, the same sex is new to me. And I won't mention it, but there's at least 2 super duper famous rockers. One has already passed that supposedly were caught having sex together by one of the rocker's wives. They don't deny it. She put it in one of her books. Hey, if it's defamation of character, then I guess they can sue it out, because believe me, I've been involved with the rocker book, and we had to change things, because that's just what happens. People say, don't you dare talk about me. And if you even infer a first name, and the way that works in court is that if someone says, hey, you mentioned my name, and people can look up as a matter of public record that you and I dated, and that name is my name, they can infer that it's me, and it's defamation, and I win. So you don't mess around with that kind of stuff. But the reason why I digress into that for a split second is that their sensibilities are completely distorted because they can do anything that they want. When you hear the stories of the Eyes Wide Shut parties, I would say that's child's play. When you start hearing about child sacrificing, now you're getting closer. Now you're getting closer to where they could be. Some families may have lost control and they're down that path, and some families may have never touched that crazy shit. Maybe they hate it, but all it takes is one generation to die off and the next generation's perverted, and all of a sudden that family name goes down the toilet. I do think it's interesting that Rothschild is Red Shield and blood is red. Very interesting, right? I had been involved with a friend of mine who was upper class when I first moved to California. It was a very peaceful family, but I think I mentioned this once before in an episode a long time ago, but I made very good friends with the family, and I still am, at least with one of them. And they hired me to do the family crest over again, to make a modern version that they could wear on their person, like rings and that kind of thing. And I got a small book of reference about the family. And it went back a long way, people. Not quite, was probably around, I think the number was like 800 AD. Like real tracking of all the wars and battles and prestigious levels of authority that these individuals, from generals to not necessarily royalty, but there definitely were a lot of extra names attached at times. But it was the mother's family on one side and the father's family on the other side. And it was astonishing that these families do track their past and their history like that. Once you're in the club, you're in the club. Just don't disturb those that have the most control and you'll be all right. Stunningly infinite. I mean, it was amazing, right? But once you wake up and you control the world, your family does. You're a proxy to that. Whether you be a distant cousin, you will always have wealth. And you will always have control because you have the wealth. It's a big deal, folks. But now, how does that apply to today? So I've just told you a little fairy tale about families that gain wealth through a fractional reserve system. Well, Europe is a bit of a mystery, and I have studied Bill Still's content about the money changers in Europe. From what I understand, all of Europe fell underneath the Rothschild thumb between the 1770s and the mid-1800s. By the mid-1800s, the Rothschilds had completely and utterly crushed all of Europe, probably at the end of the Battle of Waterloo, to be very specific. But now what about America? The Masons came over here and threw up two birds and said, fuck you guys. We're making a Magna Carta-based country. Now, you know that I have reservations about two-party systems being a very bad structure, which is revered here in America, but it's absolutely founding the country on a divide. And again, I need to go research sort of why they did that, what their rationale was one more time to make sure that it makes no sense to me, because it doesn't make any sense to me. Just think about think about a metric, a statistic, a line graph that says throughout the year, throughout the decade, when is the unfriend button used the most in Facebook? Election time comes around, it's used like crazy. A mass murder false flag comes around, it's used like crazy. Because it divides us. We're sick and tired of seeing gullible people. Sick and tired of people changing their profile pics to make some faux protest of support. Or sign of support, I should say. It just means they're totally ill-informed and unresearched, right? Now, where did it happen to the United States of America? Well, this is where Bill Still comes in. Bill's last name is exactly like, I guess, the adjective. Hell, I don't know. Still. He made a movie about Jekyll Island that I'm sure will be plenty for most of you. But all of the bankers got together on Jekyll Island. And they took the total knowledge of everything that they had learned about exchanging money in a fiat system, in a fractional reserve system. And they developed the most incredibly brilliant master plan that hasn't failed to this day in terms of them maintaining control over the world. And it was going to be the 16th Amendment in the United States of America. Now, up to that point, America was relying on gross national product and gross domestic product trade income and taxation of corporations, firearms and tobacco. Those were the three entities that experience taxes. And the government wanted for nothing. The people wanted for nothing. We didn't need any income tax. And our money was sovereign. It was based on how much gold we had access to. And America has tons of gold in the ground. We just consider it sort of an arcane practice to dig it out of the ground now. But this little amendment comes in, and it was ratified, meaning approved under gunpoint, at least 3 states on Christmas Eve. William Hearst, Skull and Bones President Taft, who is now ex-president, and the history professor Woodrow Wilson with his controller, Colonel Moon, got on a little caboose ride and went all over the United States telling everyone that the 16th Amendment was not only going to be the greatest thing ever because it was going to tax the rich and give to the poor, something that Bernie Sanders just tried to say, and it was all going to be great. And I'll spare you all of the repeat of how history went after that, but a bunch of world wars happened after that. A bunch of mechanisms happened in world history to create the need to borrow money from these banking cartel members, thus putting us in serfdom to them. But this thing gets passed, see? And this is me repeating Bill Still's information. You had 10 partners. There were really two groups of folks that made the Federal Reserve banking system, which is, again, a private for-profit bank. It's just like Wells Fargo. It's just like Chase Manhattan Bank. It is not federal by any stretch of the imagination. But it was split into two investment groups, a 10% share and a 90% share. The United States of America had to pony up 10% of the money in the form of gold to get the Federal Reserve started. So they had to actually bring hard assets to the table and say, here's our gold, you're going to print against this gold, and that's how you're going to start your fiat system. Seems a little odd, right? Seems a little odd that a fiat system that's going to be backed on nothing. But this is 1913. It was backed by something. Took a lot of the gold out of the reserves of the United States of America. But then there's that 90% that's left. But now, you would think that if you were in a contract where you have to bring gold to secure your 10% of this 100%, that the other side has to bring 90% of the gold. Seems like a pretty good deal, right? That ain't the way it went down, folks. The Rothschilds and all the other members, of which to this very day in 2016 are largely hidden. As I'm told by, I think, Bill, who said this several times on his programs, over 80% of the members of the Federal Reserve banking system, the private for-profit bank that Paulson went up and represented when he stole all the TARP money, they're unknown to this day, and we're okay with that. The people who control the money of all first world countries remain in secret to this day. And I can guarantee you that all but the Rockefellers live in Europe. You guys can find them. But again, cutting the head off the snake ain't going to do nothing with this particular world. It'll just grow back. All you're going to do if you kill the top of the pyramid is create a bunch of job openings for a bunch of other evil bastards. And they might be a lot worse. So again, we got to rebuild us, not them. But what they did was they took the fiat system of printing money, and they merely printed their 90% of the investment without any backing. So the United States of America gave up probably all of its gold to these banking cartel families who pulled off this little scandal with their shilly president, Skull and Bones member, Taft, and the completely uninformed Woodrow Wilson. And they said, here's our 90%. And someone said, deal. Here comes the 16th Amendment as crafted by Philander Knox, the individual that was the attorney to all these elite families in the world. And actually, he was the attorney here in the United States for all the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, etc., as proxy to his main client, who were the Rothschilds. I'm going to tell you right now, Fort Knox is named after Philander Knox, not after some naval captain. So the 16th Amendment of the United States of America is really more of an invasion plan than a, hey, everybody, isn't this great? And it's how interesting is that we have an amendment to the United States Constitution, which is actually us selling our children to those in Europe who were there first. The thems, those who figured out fractional reserve banking, usury, those of which have convinced us through indoctrinating our educational systems, through distractions, the Titus Flavius Coliseum of, hey, pay attention to sports, hey, pay attention to the Kardashians, hey, go to TMZ.com every morning. Not us, right? But they keep us from looking at them. I think it was Usual Suspects. But someone said the line, the greatest deception that the devil can bring upon you is to make you believe he doesn't exist. And the internet, for the very first time, I believe, has fairly convincing evidence of who they are. Every single problem that you've ever had in your life, minus perhaps romance, but I think that even romance could be attached to this issue, and I'll explain how that works. It's money-based. Your prosperity in life is all tied to, if you've been born in the last 100 years, money. It has. The Federal Reserve has been around for over 100 years now, 103 years. Now, some people, some economists and historians could very much labor and debate that mechanism has allowed America to grow well beyond her means, because we always had infinite money, because we never tied it to our supply of gold. And they would be right. Hamilton gets a lot of credit for allowing the European bankers to come over and rape us blind. Because at the time, America needed to grow and grow fast, because the constant invasions from Europe were never going to end. All right. But at what cost, right? We believe in debt now. We really believe in compound interest usury debt systems. But I led into this whole thing and took an hour to basically describe one thing. Money is the system by which they control. Now, let's just say you're having an incompatibility issue in love, just to finish that digression. The idea is that your maturity level, your ability to become compatible with another human being and centralize what is really important in life, which for anyone who's been near death, it's definitely not money. Your brain has been molded and shaped by your accessibility to financial prosperity. If you are shallow, it's because of them. If you are deep, and thus incompatible with other people because you find them shallow, it's because they're in the system and you're not. If you are perfectly compatible with someone, but you can't supply a house, you can't supply the basic food groups for the person who's interested in you, and they walk away from you, that's money. Some people get lucky and make a lot of money, and some people don't. If you've ever met someone who's very new to money, there's a very interesting thing that you'll bump into. There's a percentage of folks that are very grateful to have money, at least for the first few weeks. But there's a level of entitlement that comes into play. I once met a very wealthy person who got their wealth through a marriage. And I asked this person, I said, well, did you ever imagine you would be at this incredible level of wealth, provided the person really never came from that kind of wealth? But the person had spent 10 years in this wealth bracket. And they said, of course. I always thought I deserved all this. And I was like, wow, really? I mean, that's cool. You have a really positive outlook on life, but now money isn't everything, right? And this person has been corrupted by money. All things in life are used up, sort of like a inanimate object. So love is not really well understood. It's how much money do you have? Okay, then I love you because you're bringing me the one thing that I've fallen in love with, and that is change and prosperity. And hey, that's fine. If you know that's what you want, then fine. There's a lot of depth missing. There's a lot of hardship coming for that person, in my opinion, because eventually money never buys happiness, deep reward. It buys distraction and satiation, which is very short-lived. Ask a hoarder. Ask a hoarder that goes to Walmart every single day and brings home a little white bag of something. And the white bag gets put in a pile in their house. All they've done is they figured out a little reward system, a little dopamine trigger system that they can go and get excited about. This will be great at some future point in time. But as soon as they walk out with the item, they realize that promise is false. They got to come back tomorrow, or maybe later tonight, to do it again. Because inside, nothing's there. But what I just talked about is sort of the fundamentals of the past of them. We haven't really talked about the complexities of them today. Now, let's say that you woke up and you had control over a large segment of the world, but you didn't have complete control of every segment of the world. And so you build a little plan, because these folks plan, right? Failing to plan is planning to fail, right? Well, they don't do that. They plan, and they plan long and hard. They do. They'll plan 200, 500, 1,000 years out. Why not? It's free. It's free to plan. And they know that keeping us distracted is all they need to do. And there's two ways to keep things distracted. There's a method of distracting. There's a whole suite of things they can distract you with when the world is in a prosperous stage. Look how much money you got. Come on, don't you want that big 80-inch television? It's real important you have that car. It's real important you have that, electric thing. It's important you go to that concert. It's important you just live in concerts. But if that doesn't work, and if they want to start a war, because they have a part of their plan that needs us to physically get off our asses and go fight on behalf of them, but they need to convince us that it's because of our patriotism to our country, our fear mechanism of losing what we have. You want to keep that 80-inch television? Well, you better go kill an Arab. They'll crash the economy, which has two great beneficial things for them. One, it robs you of your wealth. It robs you of your bank accounts. But it also makes the kids of the world have nothing but war. They have to enlist. It scoops out the kids that will enlist. It scoops out the kids that are broke and have to enlist to pay for their futures. And it scoops out the kids that are raised in very patriotic families because they love their country. They see the value of freedom, but it's used as a dagger of goodwill against them. And they run off to war, distracted. And once you are shaved down, and you are yelled at, and you are sent to war, and you make really good friends, and you're in life and death situations constantly where your friends saved your lives, maybe some of your friends lost their lives. It's a paradigm of existence for the rest of your life. You'll never not be military once you're in. That should be something we can do in a very sovereign, beautiful way, and only fight back when people come get us, right? Now, the money changers in Europe have a long history of funding both sides of all wars, like I talked about in the war episode. So once they had utter control, they have utter control of you and me. Now, right now, we're in the middle of a social engineering experiment. They have some serious goals. Their main goal right now in this world is to depopulate, to kill off the old guard who understands what freedom and liberty is, to confuse the children of this world. And boy, are they good at it. Boy, are they good at it. They can make you look at your body and completely be incapable of identifying what you really are physically. And if anyone disagrees with the observation of what you truly are, you can't even figure it out for yourself. Some of these kids can't figure out what they really are. They look in the mirror and they look at their anatomy and they look at their body and they can't figure out what they are. But while they're confused, while they're having a mental disorder attached to them through pop culture, you're not allowed to acknowledge that the emperor has no clothes. We're going back into this overdose of giving the emperor the benefit of having clothes on when he's buck naked walking down the street. Mental psychosis, mental diseases are now being defended in courts of law. It's interesting. They're trying to finalize the stages that are going to make taking over this planet possible. And when crazy ideas from one country are not just crazy ideas from one country, but they are crazy ideas that are handed down in every country on the same day. This is what David Icke talked about. When a bunch of non-conjoined countries work together on one day and do the same thing. When a news story goes all around the world and the newscasters on television from Australia to Europe to America all say their version of the same exact words on the same day to pump up an agenda, maybe to program you to think that one person's a boogeyman, to think that there's some sort of injustice going on in the world, that's when you know there's a them. You know, what's funny about the people sitting across from the table and saying to you, well, who's them? Who's they? And they feel like they got you. The idea is that if you can't give them, Lord Rothschild's phone number in the next sentence, that somehow you are crazy. But now, if you were to stop the conversation and say, well, do black holes exist? Is the Big Bang real? Oh, well, of course. How do you know? Well, because we can see that everything's expanding in the universe. Oh, so you're able to see the effects of this theory in your mind because you believed all the bullshit science, but let's just give you the benefit of the doubt. You're able to see sort of the circumstantial effects of this theory of yours, and therefore it is real to you. I can tell you right now, there's not a single picture of a black hole ever captured ever. They're a complete theoretical construct on paper, as I've said several times, by the late 80s, early 90s. They had agreed that these things would disperse if they were to ever create. But that's good enough, right? The effects of something on something else give you the illusion that something's there. Al Gore's movie, Inconvenient Truth, was not worthy of any of the awards that he received. To make such a bold doomsday claim in a movie, it would have to be vetted by virtually all the scientists on planet Earth with an overwhelming thumbs up. All he had was a claim that a bunch of people on a list had certified him. When people started investigating the list, they started finding out most of these people didn't have science degrees in the area of discipline he's discussing. The 6 super-duper world authorities that came out of the IPCC, which was the group created at the UN to investigate global warming, sued him for years to get their name off that list. But he carried it through his award ceremonies. He carried a falsified list through his award ceremonies. Then he bought a home in Montecito, which is a coastal region of California, which in his 2006 movie was underwater by 2010. And if you watch the opening ceremonies for the Olympics, they replayed all this shit right in the middle of the intro to the Olympics, putting a global agenda in so that everyone watching this stuff would believe in global warming. We just had one of the coolest summers in Southern California since I've been here. But I mentioned royalty, and I didn't quite finish up on that. Once you are able to summarize all of these global agendas and the effects that they have on the world, and you can start to sense a central body that does control the agendas of this planet, whether it be 20 people or 20,000 people. Again, divide that by 8 billion, and it's nothing. Hell, 100,000 people working at the very top would be nothing, percentage-wise, right? Once you can get into that realm, you start to realize that they've done a really good job. The Rothschilds are a very wealthy family. There's no doubt about it. They exist. There's all kinds of Rothschild products around the world. There's still royalty everywhere. There are still monarchs in Spain, in Norway, in England for sure. There's emperors in Japan. There are really intense families that used to run the place overtly. And now we assume they run the place covertly. I've debated several times with folks who are on the outside looking in that say that, well, the Windsor family, which was formerly the Saxe-Gothberg family until World War II, when they figured that name was probably not good to recognize the fact they're not British citizens whatsoever. I mean, they're not British blood. They're all Germanic blood, except for maybe Princess Di's family, her offspring. They'll tell me that these bodies don't have any power, that it's old money. You hear that about the Rothschilds as well. And then again, if you look at the photographs of the Bilderberg meetings, you'll find out that the one common denominator contact at the Bilderberg meetings are the known proxies to the Rothschild family. Everyone talks to them. And only the big heads, not all these little pipsqueaks that get allowed in. But it is illegal in Europe right now to press charges against royalty. You can't do it. Doesn't matter if you saw it happen. Doesn't matter if they had a press conference and molested children or killed children right in front of your face. They would have to change the laws in England to press charges for what they just observed. Well, you might say, oh, that's just an old law. There's laws on the books in America where you're supposed to shoot a shotgun if you come to a four-way intersection because they just forgot to deprecate the law when traffic lights came out. Well, one of those is absurd, and the other one makes sense. If you were to run the world, wouldn't you write the laws to protect yourself completely and utterly? For those that tell me that the Rothschild family, for instance, has no more power and no more wealth in the world, I would say this to you. When did that event ever occur? When did the Sachs-Gothberg family ever, along with the Rothschilds, ever experience a financial collapse of power? The Rothschilds bragged in the 1850s that they were worth $6.5 billion. If you amortize that up, you're in the quadrillions. When did they have a final financial catastrophe in their life? Why isn't that in the history books? Wouldn't there be a huge change of guard if the wealthiest family on planet Earth somehow, in controlling all elements of world finance, which is all fake, wouldn't that be a piece of history in the world? When did the royal family of England lose all their wealth? Because at one point, I believe they owned, 45% of all explored real estate in the world? And, the most conservative estimate I have heard to this day, 2016, is that family, to this day, above ground, owns 15% of the world's real estate. I don't know what's true. That's probably completely inaccurate. But it's probably not less by much from what they used to own. But what's own mean? Why would a European country export all their jobs from countries that they control to seemingly countries they don't control? What are the two countries that do the most manufacturing and service-oriented services in the world that are involved in exporting jobs from America? We have China that does manufacturing of hard products, and we have India that provides intellectual services like programming, technical support, that sort of thing. And believe me, I know South America is slowly coming up as a big competitor, right? Well, India was completely owned and controlled by the British royal family. Then Gandhi came around and supposedly knocked them out, and then he was assassinated, right? If you study the formation of the Trilateral Commission, for those of you who don't know, there's the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, which addressed the concerns of all first world countries, which basically comprise most of Europe and the United States. But that left out third world countries that were getting really, really populated and turning into gigantic war machines. And some of them just real nice intellectual powers. Well, the Rockefellers put together this idea of the Trilateral Commission under guise and command from their controllers, which are the Rothschilds, right? From what I understand, the Trilateral Commission idea was proposed in the late 50s and then finally put in place in the early 60s. It really took effect in the 70s. But it gave a voice to third world countries. We have the evolution of power in third world countries goes a little something like this. You have China that was pretty much in the Stone Ages. They had a symbolic, iconic language that you couldn't type on a keyboard very easily. So they couldn't really join the information age. Yet India, which had a nice phonetic language that you could work with, but they were also in the Stone Ages. They really were. But they hustled and bustled, and they got prepared to join the rest of the world, the first world countries. Well, China has a tremendous number of banks, over almost 50 banks, that are to this day Rothschild banks. They just have Chinese names. There's a whole list of them online you can go find. But now, how did India transfer? India was essentially given control, sort of their government. But the industry and the banking all continues to go back to Europe. Now, why would a group that has control over Europe and America allow in third world countries if they couldn't control the outcome of that agreement? It is said several times among all the families that are extremely powerful that they don't engage in negotiations whereby they do not know the outcome. Meaning they don't gamble. I guarantee you that China is not a gamble for Europe. India is not a gamble for Europe. And South America, that was largely taken over in the 1970s. Go see a book called The Diaries of an Economic Hitman or something like that. That guy was involved with the IMF and the complete takeover of South America by overthrowing government after government. I mean, here you are watching the Olympics, right? And most of Brazil and Argentina have sold off the rights to their rainforest to China to completely cut down. It'll completely screw up the world. The amount of oxygen that comes out of those forests is paramount to the survivability of mankind. But they care about global warming. Isn't that funny? They cut down all the trees. The Trilateral Commission was a way of bringing into the fold the stragglers. The stragglers that wanted to join, which is cool. They should want to join the rest of the world in the modern age, and they've done a brilliant job. South America is next. Extremely well educated, on average, and they have genetics that have demonstrated their capabilities tremendously. Africa is going to be wiped out. They're going to be wiped out if we don't change the planet. Russia and the Middle East are the two little anomalies for the world powers. We've seen that Putin's done with them. They're going into their own sort of McCarthy era where they're trying to find the banking cartel sympathizers. They're trying to get rid of all dependencies with world banks, the IMF agreements they may have signed in the past when the coup of Russia happened under Boris Yeltsin. And the Middle East is sort of split. Every country that does business through OPEC with the world elite, they're safe. Saudi Arabia is safe. Jordan is safe. But all the other countries that don't have their constitutions hardwired with big financial Ethernet cables to the IMF and World Bank, well, they're being crushed by the United States of America because the United States of America is controlled by this cartel. And the people at the top who control the wars, you control greenlighting things. They have a large history of exchanging money into their personal bank accounts in exchange for services with the blood, sweat, and tears and the souls of all the citizens in first world countries. It just so happens, unfortunately, that the United States of America has turned into this incredible global superpower of military might. If you've missed my analogies on this particular thing, or analogy, think of Thor's hammer, right? Big wood handle wrapped in leather with a big slug of metal at the end, some magical dwarven metal or something, right? Well, America is the metal at the end of the handle. We are the resistance of mass that crushes anything under it. But the handle goes right back to the world banks. And the substrate between the actual hand and the metal are all the shilly people in this country that do not believe in a God, that don't believe in the experiment that is the American dream, which is simply an idea. And they're willing to sell out us for them. There's this big debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And I just throw this in there real quickly. You have a woman that has been caught at every single turn taking money, like a bribe, to do something for another organization that is not part of the American construct. And one guy is just probably one of the most successful businessmen in American history. But they're trying to demonize the guy that is living for the American dream and trying to support the American dream through getting rid of these trade agreements, which will again fix the financial sovereignty of this country, which is the root of all the problems that we have in this world. We're spending $60 million a day for fake space programs. What do you think $60 million a day could do for American citizens? How many people who are starving right now could get fed? How many people have a great idea that could get a bank loan? If $60 million a day were invested in American people, how many arguments have you had with your spouse or your boyfriend or girlfriend over money? I guarantee you, if $60 million a day was injected into the economy of this country under the guise of education, getting people, probably education would get most people off food stamps. Once anyone tastes their destiny for a split second, that EBT card's going to look like something they don't want to have anything to do with. It'll look like kryptonite to Superman because they want to control their own destiny. We know that some people have children to increase their EBT payouts, their welfare payouts. They wouldn't have to do that if they just have the job that makes them happy, right? But now let's loop back before we conclude here, or as we conclude. Let's say that you believe everything I'm saying. You're believing that there's a them. And there are many rings of servitude to them that make it all possible. You have the world elites, you have their immediate reports that would be the controllers for a lot of the politicians and military people and corporate people. And from that, you essentially have 3 layers of the world that are on equal ground with each other. One's not more powerful than the other because they all work together equally. One would be your investment banking houses, which ensure that the money, as soon as it's created in these fiat systems, is distributed to the corporations that do ill will, like Monsanto, that makes food that gives us cancer. A lot of the hospitals and things that try to convince us we couldn't possibly have a child outside of a hospital bed. We have children in positions that are completely contradictory to the way we're born to have a child. We're supposed to squat and have a child squatting, but we're laying on beds, ripping apart the woman's body. Now, leaning towards cesarean, because leaning on your back and having a child creates a lot of complications for both the baby and the mother. But you're convinced that, the world population is better off, that women died like crazy, which is a complete bunch of bullshit. If you believe that women died until hospitals came around, then you haven't been very, very deep into the history of this world. I come from Kansas, where women were having, on average, like 8 babies. There were no hospitals, all right? But the other layer is military. So you have a banking cartel that works through investment banking houses. That money gets funneled to corporations, which will do their will, putting fluoride in our water, putting a bunch of GMO in our foods. And you could essentially put pharmaceutical and medical in that too, giving us cancer first, and then servicing the cancer by giving us draconian treatments like chemotherapy. Most everything that we get in terms of cancer is putting a toxin in our body and then becoming malnutritioned through bad food supplies and having things like vitamin C demonized, right? But military is where it really meets the pavement. That's where we get killed pretty much blatantly right in front of our eyes. We're going to take your child, we're going to create an excuse, and we're going to put them in a war, and they'll probably die. What happens to our soldiers when they come back? When there's a war going on, every car of a patriotic family gets a sticker saying, "Support our troops," here in America. But when the soldiers come back with PTSD, with limbs missing, or they come back in a pine box, right? They're not taken care of. They're not taken care of. And this is a global issue. There's a global issue with this in every major country. They don't care about you the second you do their will. They're not here to take care of you. You're here to take care of them. That's what serfdom's all about. This is not Downton Abbey where they care about their workers. There's something called the stock market, and I want to there's not enough to make a full episode on this, so I'm going to throw it here at the end of this episode. If I tell you that the stock market is an investment vehicle for you, you look at it and you go, oh my God, it's just so chaotic. There's no way to really make money. It's just like a glorified Las Vegas. At least in Las Vegas, I can have some fun. I can eat a dinner. I can watch a show. When you go into the stock market, it's this brutal world where you lose all your wealth. There's 2 sides to the stock market, people. There's the insider trading layer where Warren Buffett lives. He lives in insider trading. He doesn't do anything without an insider trading track. He doesn't risk money at all. The only thing he could possibly do is exchange part of his money into a loss to prop up a company like Apple. But on the backside, they're going to tell him, well, okay, we need you to put like a couple billion in Apple because they're really doing horrible, but there's part of the history that we're making about Apple declining that, we have to keep them up in the history books. So you're going to put your money in. You're going to lose a lot. But we're going to insider trade you this other information, which will make it up to you. And by the way, your whole investment portfolio has been based on insider trading, so you're just lucky to be here anyway. You got more money than you'll ever need. So just relax. And I doubt he puts up any resistance. You have minions like George Soros, who just put a huge put option on the entire stock market of the United States of America because he knows it's going to crash. You realize if the stock market goes up under Donald Trump, Soros loses all of his money. But if they crash it, which it won't, Trump won't be able to stop the crash. Neither will Hillary. Hillary's going to gleefully allow it to happen. She will. So how do we fix it? How do we combat them? How do we do it? Well, the instinct is to say, we'll just kill them all. We'll find them, we'll kill them. If you're a pacifist, at least we'll incarcerate them into jail cells where they can't see each other. They never get any time out. They're in that cell until they rot and die. And I'm going to tell you that won't change a thing. That'll just create job openings, like I said earlier in the episode. Probably more evil people with less education will come into their positions. The plans that have been laid out, which at least have a rollover plan to sort of ebb us slowly, to boil the frog into tyranny, will go away. And who knows? Who knows what would happen after that? Maybe world peace would happen, but I don't know. But you remember that old game? One of these things is not like the other. You remember that old game? It used to be on Sesame Street. Used to be in your childhood educational materials. Can you pick the one thing that doesn't belong here? It's an IQ test, by the way. That is the formula. That is as simple as it gets to get rid of them. Now, there's always probably going to be some of them around. Them being defined as the greedy, the non-empathetic, the reptilian R-factor brain people. We have to rebuild society from the bottom up, and we have to start saying that a lot. I've said it a lot on the show, but I probably haven't told you specifically. It is my belief that we need to start saying that to each other. When you're in debates with folks that are capable of hearing that information, we have to say, look, we're not going to be able to find them in enough time to save the world. It's bad enough we may not be able to re-engineer the world fast enough to save the world. But we have to make things like usury stick out again. We have to make things like greed stick out again. We have to raise our children to share, to care about other people's feelings, to feel other people's feelings. We have to. And when someone comes into the room and starts behaving badly, there needs to be a groupthink that looks at that person. You got 12 people in a room and the one guy starts going off. Racist, bigotry, whatever it is. Starts worshiping money, starts saying things like, well, as long as I get my paycheck, I'm good. Which is a very common phrase I hear even today. We have to make those statements and those thought processes stick out like a sore thumb. We just do. I hear a lot of disputes in the world, when guys get into disputes with their females. And they're always trying to sort of solve the problem at the wrong end, which is there's a systemic cause to the problem. There's a symptom that pops out, and they're up there at the symptom trying to solve the problem. When the only thing that they need to do is really communicate to the extent that the systemic malfunction is understood. And maybe you, if you're the one on the receiving end in your mind, maybe you did something wrong. Maybe you communicated poorly to begin with, and then you need to sort of say, well, look, I see where we got off on the wrong foot. I communicated badly. I was being flippant in an area where maybe I should have had more empathy towards how you were feeling about the situation, even though you were misunderstanding everything about what I was trying to do. And I simply got angry because you were misunderstanding me. I should have pulled back and communicated and said, I see what's going on. I see. You think I meant this, right? I am so sorry. I totally didn't mean that at all. I apologize for using the words that I used, perhaps the tone of voice I used, the actions I flew off the handle and did. The nice thing is that, and this is sort of the thing I hear all the time, which is fantastic, which is I think that 99.9% of this planet is very empathetic, or at least sympathetic, and wants a good life. We're just confused. We're worshiping the Colosseum day in and day out, defending it. It breaks my heart every time I hear about a family that has a TV night to watch swill. Folks that lose their entire lives to the causes of these folks that are the them. And their way of retreating to find a little bit of happiness is to jump into the Colosseum of distraction to solve their problem. We have to cut that for a split second and say, look, it's okay if you watch a baseball game. It's okay if you watch, I guess, a reality show, which will do nothing more than make you a materialistic person, as long as you understand what you're doing. You're walking into the Colosseum that has been created to distract you. You need to understand that you're weaning yourself off your addiction. For anybody who's kicked an addiction of any kind, drugs, alcohol, same thing, gambling, any of that kind of stuff. Some people can do the cold turkey, but some people slowly stop smoking as many cigarettes, stop drinking as many drinks, and they sort of just wean themselves off. Maybe that's what some folks have to do. Once you become a truther and you realize how cabal this stuff is against you and how black and white it is, you can do the cold turkey, because it's sort of like, would I wake up in the morning and drink Drano? No. But I used to, and man, I used to get really sick. It hurts. The elite of the world are merely human beings that got there first. They amassed wealth probably first. They amassed possessions first. And then they simply developed the psychosis generation after generation to protect what they have acquired. And now they're batshit crazy psychopaths. They simply are. They don't believe in communication. They like having the coveted secrets about how the world works and how humanity works. They do not want to wake up with all of us on their doorstep, about to tear their mansions down, about to knock the doors down, go in and wipe them out. They don't want that. They don't want to be incarcerated. They don't want to be known. You know, Google has an image of everything you could possibly imagine, right? If you were to say, I'm going to search on an image in Google, and I'd say Scotch tape on a red box. Never done it, but I'm sure there's probably 100 photographs of Scotch tape on a red box. But go try to look up these families. Go try to find pictures of them. Look up their names. And other than royalty, which has a job of becoming the faceplate of any nationalistic border, you can't find them very much. You can find a couple photographs, not much. Because they've done a good job making sure that they don't have photographs of themselves that get leaked out very often. And I think up to probably the 70s, they had no idea the internet was coming. They kept them out of the publishing. That's easy. They own all the publishers. But the internet's a renegade device, right? Someone could have taken a photograph, kept it, not let anyone know they have it. There's no digital signature for a photograph in a drawer. Then the internet comes around, and they realize, holy shit, I can upload this to a couple different places. Instagram, Facebook, put it on some renegade server. Now it starts to get around. So they got a problem on their hands. I think you feel me. They really exist. And they exist at all levels of everything. Yes, there's banking cartel families that I believe are at the tippy top of the pyramid. How else do you control the world besides money? I can't control the world by promises. I have to affect your life if I'm going to control you. I have to give you money that you can do something with. And once you feel the power of inexhaustible wealth, what can I do to you? Everyone has a price, is what they always say, right? And I think that man hates the idea that they have a price. But I have to say, your constitution would never be tested more than the day they show up at your doorstep and offer you money. And they simply say, how much do you need? Maybe you're smart enough to say, well, I need money, but I also need opportunity. And you guys control opportunity. How many comedians carry agendas right into their comedy acts? How many actors go up and talk at the UN? How many musicians degrade society in their lyrics? And they're rewarded handsomely. Now, I want to make a disclosure here, because the Ali Wong 1-hour episode, go watch it. She's pretty cool. She's got completely new material, and she's utterly a brilliant human being. I mean, bar none. This woman is utterly ingenious, right? But she does an HPV section inside of her bit. She says everyone has HPV, and you can't detect it in men. She says you all have it. She's joking. But what does that do if you hear her and you believe you have HPV? You might vaccinate your kids against it because you've heard somewhere, you can't remember, yeah, HPV is serious, and boy, it's not detectable in men, so you better get your daughters all wound up in a vaccination that gives them vaginal warts. Gives them HPV. Plus, it's a $900 shot regimen that the pharmaceutical companies can make. It wasn't that funny of a joke, but it's in that bit. And they all carry agendas. Almost all of them. So we're surrounded by their influence. I know that most of you, this is all preaching to the choir. I think very few of you will make it to the end of this. If you do, I thank you very much. Now, I've been saying a lot at the very end of these episodes about how your comments are phenomenal, and I would love to be able to just end the episode without saying it, but I have to say it again. You guys are phenomenal. I love, there's two parts that I love about the comments. One, a great comment coming in. But even better than that is when you guys start productively discussing things with each other. So if you want to have a great ride and you feel what I'm saying, you're not, some person hurling your negativity everywhere. It's okay to disagree. Just try not to be offensive and try to be productive with your disagreeing, right? This show respects your beliefs regardless if we totally disagree, right? But start talking to each other. I would say one of the comments that I like the most is when people report back about how they've taken their beliefs, perhaps something they learned on the show, and they share it with friends and family, and something clicks, something works. The whole thing about Do You Dream of Space, it's been really cool. People coming back going, damn it, I haven't either. I'm a huge sci-fi fan. I've asked all my family and friends, and they haven't either. Massively interesting, right? Something's been programmed in us to not think about that stuff. It's phenomenal. If you haven't already, go to mkultraradio.com. That's all I'm going to say. All the feeds are there, video, audio. Take your pick. We have a big job ahead of us. A big job. To make evil, selfishness, people who have R-factor brains, we've got to get them to stick out like a sore thumb, such that the social pressures for them to give, to be empathetic, we have to drive that into their genes. I know you feel me. Anyhow, take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.